C.S. Lewis once said, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken." That's true of the love in marriages, where hearts have been broken by divorce and by infidelity and by the death of the loved one. And it's true for most people who have children. How many ways have we suffered because we love our children? On Sunday afternoon, June 12th, 1983, the Christian philosopher Nicholas Wolterstorff received a call about his 25-year-old son, Eric, who had been mountain climbing in Germany. The call was from Eric's landlady. She said, "Mr. Wolterstorff, I must give you bad news." "Yes." "Mr. Wolterstorff, Eric has been climbing in the mountains, and there has been a serious accident." "Yes." "Mr. Wolterstorff, I must tell you, Eric is dead, and you must come quickly." He said that call divided his life into before and after. And over the next year, he wrote a book, Lament for a Son, which he describes as a cry of grief. He says, "Grief was the price I was paying for love." He said, "Suffering is the meaning of this world, for love is the meaning, and love suffers." That's been true for probably every person who ever loved, including Jesus. John 3:16 says, "God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, knowing that they both would suffer, because God's Son, Jesus, would love the world just as God the Father loved the world." John chapter 1 says, he came to what was his own, and his own people would not accept him. In the days that were leading up to his death, as he went toward Jerusalem and near Jerusalem, he went up on the Mount of Olives and sat down overlooking the city. And he cried out, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered your children together as a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." On that hillside today, on the Mount of Olives today, there's a small chapel. And inside the chapel, inscribed on its walls, are two Latin words, Domini Flavi, which means the Lord wept. They broke his heart, and then they broke his body, and then they nailed him to the cross. It seems that no one asked him, "Do you have any last words?" But thank God, we do have Jesus' last words. And the first thing he said was, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." Words that mean to us that there is nothing we can do or say or be that would put us beyond the reach of God's forgiveness. The criminal hanging on the cross next to him said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus says, "I tell you today you will be with me in paradise." Words that mean to me that Jesus and God's forgiveness and grace and love are given to people like the guy on the cross who didn't follow Jesus until the end, and to people like us who do not follow Jesus with all of our days. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Because he experienced that feeling of being abandoned by God, left alone. But he knew what his Father had always told God's creation ever since the creation. "Remember, I am with you always, whether we can feel it or not. And the last thing he said before he died were not words to my God, but rather words to God, his Father. And he said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Words that mean to us that we need not fear death. We need not fear giving up our most precious possession, but can give it, our life that is, but can give it into the hands of God, the loving hands of God. There's a little story about a boy, probably 6 or 7 years old, who used to bring home his friends after school. They would play in the backyard until it was nighttime. And one day his father realized that the son had stopped bringing his friends home. And that night, as he was putting the boy to bed, he said, Son, I noticed you don't bring your friends home to play with you anymore. The boy nodded yes. The dad said, is it because of your mom? He nodded again. And he said, is it because of your mom's hands? The boy nodded. He said, I need to tell you why your mom's hands look like that. One day when you were a very little child, she was upstairs and she heard you screaming. She ran downstairs and saw that you had fallen into the burning coals in the fireplace. She reached her bare hands into the fireplace to pull you out, but her hands were badly burned and became badly scarred. So when you see your mom's hands, that's how much she loves you. Within the next week or two, the father noticed that the boy had resumed bringing his friends home to play in the backyard after school. And a few days after that, he overheard his son say to a friend, you see my mom's hands? That's how much she loves me. On Good Friday, we see God's hands. Christianity is the only world religion that has a God who suffers. We prefer a God who prevents suffering. But if we had a God like that, we would not have a God who loved. William Sloane Coffin once said, I could never believe in a God who did not suffer, given the suffering of this world. The cross of Jesus is the clearest possible sign of the depths of God's love. And it's the clearest possible example of the depths of God's suffering. Jesus once said, greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friend. But there is a greater love than that the Son of God lay down his life for his enemies. C.S. Lewis said, to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and perhaps broken. God knows that. God knows that. Just look at his hand.